Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Expansive CEO podcast. I am your host, Hannah Chapman, and it is Thursday, August 28th at 1:36 p.m. So this is another episode of Investment Friday. Now, Brad is not feeling great this week, so he is not here with me. I am flying solo. So we are going to talk about some financial planning topics this week. And what I want to talk about is 529 plans. And why is that? Well, it is the end of August. We are having, some kids go back to college already, maybe in the last couple of weeks, and then more kids going back to college or going for the first time, really soon here, starting up in September. So this is a topic that is very top of mind for a lot of parents, especially in the United States, who have kids either going to college, in college right now, thinking about, planning for college and all of that. So before we get into that, I wanted to do a quick market update. And right now, as of today, we just hit a pretty major high point, a high watermark on the S&P 500. We hit 6,500 today on the S&P 500, which, as a reminder, is an aggregate of the 500 largest companies in the United States by market cap. So when we have that happen, anytime we hit a new high watermark, we can pretty much expect over the next, several days, maybe week, that we're going to pull back off of that high. That's how it always works. If you look in like the micro view of any high watermark, we're always going to hit that high and then come back off of it a little bit. We're going to have people who are selling at the high, taking gains, and it's going to come off a little bit. So we will see what happens over the next week. I would expect that we would have a couple of down days. We don't typically hit a major high and then just hit another high and hit another high, right? We're not going to, most likely, not going to like skyrocket up to 7,000 and 7,500 within the next, couple weeks. It's going to take a while to, we're going to come back down off of this high, and then we might get another updraft on new news, which the new news that would be coming out in the next several weeks would be, potential interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve, which is what is currently driving a lot of this growth in the equity markets. We've basically seen 4 to 5 interest rate cuts priced in to the market at this point. And that's 4 to 5 interest rate cuts expected over the next year. So a lot of analysts are expecting that first cut may come in the September Federal Open Market Committee meeting. So we will see what happens there. As usual, if the market is expecting something and, we get it, but let's say Jerome Powell's comments about it don't jive with the market, right? We're going to see some volatility around that, whether they cut or not. So let's just expect it. And then, we will talk about it here on the podcast, when it happens. If it happens. And again, if they don't cut and the market is expecting it, that'll cause one type of volatility. If they do cut, we might see another lift. Who knows? We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. So there's our market update. And now let's talk 529s. So what is a 529 plan? First, a lot of you listening probably have an idea of what that is. But what I find when I go to, really talk to clients about what their options are and what they can do with a 529, if it's a good option for their kids or not, there are actually a lot of questions. So we're not going to be able to answer every question, in this podcast, but I want you to leave it feeling like you have a much better idea of what your options are, why you might choose certain things over the other. And if you have questions for your financial advisor, that you feel like you are prepared and are, you have some of these really good questions to go to them and talk about things with. So, what is a 529 plan? A Section 529 plan comes from Section 529 of the IRS code, and that means it is a tax advantaged account. There are different kinds of 529 plans. The education account isn't the only one. But we're not going to get into that right now. If you've ever heard of an ABLE account, ABLE, that is also a 529 plan. It's from Section 529, but it's for special needs funding versus, college education funding. So just so you know, that is not a only for education, but the 529 for college is the one that we typically refer to. There is no limit, no appreciable limit really on how much you can contribute to a 529 plan in any given year. There are aggregate limits depending on what state you're in. Now, those aggregate limits are pretty high. It's usually in the, upper 400 to $500,000 range. So it's a pretty high limit. But there are, certain states cap it at, okay, your 529 plan can't have more than $490,000 in it, right? XYZ. That's just one example. Your state and the plan that you are invested in, you just have to check and see what that limit is for you. For most people, even people, who are very affluent, have high income, or have assets that they want to contribute to a 529, very few people ever contribute that maximum because it's just not terribly practical for most people. Or if you do plan on spending that much on education, typically you've got like some different kinds of accounts so that you can vary the tax treatment or pick and choose what you want to pull from. So that's the first piece. You can contribute $200 a month. You can contribute $2,000 a month. There's not really a limit for most intents and purposes when we're talking about a 529 plan. The benefit of the 529 plan, the reason that people use them is that even though you're putting in tax dollars or you're putting in contributions after tax, so you've already been taxed on the money, right? It's just like you're saving into a regular savings account in that respect. The money grows tax deferred. So you do not pay taxes on the interest or the dividends, or if you make trades in the account and there are capital gains, you don't pay any taxes on the growth of that account. And that can be a really, really big benefit, whether your child goes to college or not, actually. And we can get into that in just a minute. So as you're doing your contributions, you're putting in that money after tax. The money then grows tax deferred. There's no taxes paid in the time that the money is growing. And then when you get to college age, if your child uses that 529 money for qualified education expenses, which are listed out on the IRS website, we know what qualified education expenses are. If you use the $529 for those qualified expenses, you never pay tax. So you can take a withdrawal from the account, pay tuition, pay room and board, pay for books, and for necessary expenses. And that is a fully tax-free use of those funds. So that is the main benefit. That is why people use 529 plans. And it can be a really big benefit. So for example, let's say you take a $10,000 contribution when your child is born. You put $10,000 into a 529, just a lump sum, put 10,000 in when they're born, and just let it grow. And it grows, let's say it grows at 8% per year over their lifetime, until they're 18 on average. So let's say that $10,000 turns into $50,000 by the time they're 18. That means you put in $10,000 of your own after tax money, but then that $40,000 of growth has been able to grow tax free over time. And when you pull it out later on, you never pay taxes on those dollars. So again, that's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big benefit. The drawback, or what's been seen as the drawback, and what was the drawback for a really long time, is that you could only use $529 for qualified education expenses. And in the first drafts of that code, there weren't really any other ways to get the money out. So if your child didn't end up going to college or didn't end up needing the 529 money, if they got scholarships and didn't need it, if they went into the military and then didn't, like if for any reason your child didn't need all of the 529 money that was saved, there wasn't really a good way to get it out. The only way that you could really get money out of the 529 for a long time was that you could change the beneficiary. So, like if I own a 529 for my oldest daughter, and then she didn't need all of the money, I could then change the beneficiary to, her younger brother, my son, or if he didn't need it, then to the youngest. I have three kids. So I would have, three people I could change it to. And then if all three of them didn't need it and they grow up and they have kids, we can then change the beneficiary to a grandchild as well, right? So there's options. We can change the beneficiary, but you couldn't get the money out otherwise, which for a lot of people was a big reason why they would choose not to use a 529 plan, because they didn't want to have an asset that was just for education. They didn't want to have something that was so pigeonholed that if they saved into that then they would be penalized if they didn't end up using it all. And that's a valid concern. And especially with how college costs have risen over the last couple of decades, it's been, I've had many people ask me, like, what is this going to be like? How is college actually going to be this expensive? How are people going to pay for this? And it's been interesting. And from 2007, when I first started in financial planning, until now, like I can say from experience, having done financial plans back in 2007, 2008, we would do projections for kids at that time to say, okay, well, in 15 years, you know, it's projected to be, 25 to $30,000 per year for a state school. And the parents at that time were like, holy crap, how is that possible? Like, how is a state school going to be that expensive? And well, here we are in 2025, and that is the reality, actually, in a lot of places. Um, and so, as much as I don't want that to be true, and I don't want the average cost of college to, inflate at 5.5% per year, that has been the historical average for quite a while. So, anyway, I just thought I would throw that in there. that the projections, from back in that time actually have held true, which is kind of crazy. Um, so I say that to then say this, that when we are projecting forward now for people with teenagers, for people with young kids, or maybe, just pregnant having babies, or people with grandkids who want to fund a 529, I mean, as far as we can tell, like the cost of college isn't really changing so much. And it's still rising at that same, roughly 5.5% per year, as far as we can tell for right now. So that's what we plan for. When I do education projections, that's how I plan for them. Now, what else is happening with the 529 plans in particular is that the code is being revised and expanded to allow people to use those funds in different ways. And that has been a really, really important thing for discussion and for, consideration for people that I have been working with and talking to about like what are your options for college. So we're going to get to that in just a second, but I want to take a little bit of a diversion to talk about the two different ways that you can own a 529 plan, because this is actually super important as well. And I've had people be confused, and have one type or the other and not quite understand the implications. So the two ways that a 529 can be owned are one, that the parent owns it and the child is the beneficiary. And that's probably the most common standard way that 529s are owned. So that would be like me, Hannah, being the owner of the 529 and my daughter, Clara, being the beneficiary. What happens there is that if that is the case, then I am the owner. If Clara doesn't use that money, then, like I said before, I could pass that down to Henry. And if Henry doesn't need it, I can pass it down to Hazel. I can just change the beneficiary when I am the owner. So that is an important thing to know. The other way that a 529 can be owned is that it can be owned in UTMA, UTMA, which stands for Uniform Transfer to Minors Act ownership. If you are at all familiar with this, with UTMA ownership, that is when the child actually owns the account. The money is the child's, and the parent or the guardian is just the custodian on behalf of that child until the child reaches the age of majority in your state. So most states that's age 21. There are a couple of states where it's 18 and I think one where it's like 22. So you just have to check your state that you live in and see what the age of majority is, because at that age of majority, that money then turns into the child's fully. The adult no longer has any control over that account. It is the child's money. And the UTMA account must, for tax purposes, must be used for the benefit of that child. Okay. So why would someone choose this ownership? Because then the other piece of that, since with the UTMA ownership, it has to be used for that child. You cannot change the beneficiary. So if that child does not use their all of their money in their 529 for their college education, you can't change the beneficiary because it's their money. It's not, the parent doesn't own it to be able to change. Now, the other thing that I wanted to share, because this is actually really important when you're filling out the FAFSA, or your university's financial aid package. So, like private universities, for example, don't necessarily use the FAFSA. They have their own internal financial aid application, but whatever financial aid application that you do have to do for college, UTMA accounts, UTMA 529s and parentally owned 529s, they all will factor in to the financial aid conversation. And so if you have a 529 that is in the parent ownership, so I own the 529 for Clara. We'll go with that. What that does on the FAFSA, at least, is that it's considered part of my assets. It's a parental asset, and it can reduce the aid that's available to my daughter by up to 5.64% of the account's value. So if there's $100,000 in the 529 account, it could reduce the aid that she's eligible for by up to $5,640 is what that means. Okay. And that's if I own it. That's if the parent owns it. It is not an UTMA account. If it is an UTMA 529 instead, that gets reported as the child's asset. So again, if let's say I have an UTMA 529 for Clara, I am then not the owner. Clara is technically the owner. It is in her name. It is her asset. And since it's considered an asset for her, it then reduces her financial aid by up to 20% of the account's value. So any aid that she would be eligible for is reduced by 20% of that account. So again, if it's $100,000 in her UTMA 529, then the amount of financial aid she's eligible for is reduced by $20,000 or 20%. So that's a really, really big difference. And I think that's one of the biggest ones that is a problem when it comes to financial aid, when we're talking the difference between parent owned versus UTMA owned, and UTMA owned for the child. The it, I can't make a like blanket recommendation. You really do need to talk to a financial advisor for your specific situation. But it's rare that the UTMA ownership would actually be more beneficial for any reason. So if there's special circumstance, absolutely like talk about it, see if there's a reason for it. But for the most part, for most people, when you have the option, when if you go in and you start a 529 account for your child, you're going to want to pick you owning it, parent owning it, guardian owning it, and the child as the beneficiary. Okay, so super important little uh, rabbit hole there. Regular ownership, UTMA ownership. For most people, you're going to go with regular parent or guardian ownership. So that would go for grandparents as well. So if you're a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or however this goes, whoever you are wanting to contribute for, because if anyone can contribute to a 529 for any child, so that's another really nice thing about 529s. If you're a grandparent or a very generous aunt or uncle or anything else, you want to own the account yourself and have the child as the beneficiary in almost all cases. Okay. So let's talk then again about, let's say you do have a whole bunch of 529 money, and let's say your parents or grandparents, had a 529 account for you, or they started one for your child or whatever, and there's assets. You have plenty of 529 assets. And you get to the point where you're like, oh, well, I don't know if we're going to use all of this for college, or where they're looking at, I'm not sure. So, again, the aggregate limit for 529s is in the $500,000 range. If your child wants to go to law school or med school, right? They could end up using that entire balance for something like that. Or if they have, want to do a PhD program or anything, they could end up spending that much on education. But for most people, average, we're looking at more in the, $100,000 to $150,000 range for full funding for a state school for 4 years. So if you have, let's say you have $200,000 or $300,000 in 529 money from, a variety of sources, what are some of the ways that you can use that money if it's not all going to be needed for college education? Well, one thing that has been opened up in the last couple of years is that you can use up to $10,000 per year for private school in junior high and high school. You can also use it for other tutoring or other, education related expenses. You can use up to $10,000 per year. So that could be a really big help in some places where, it is a lot more common for kids to go to private school. In some states, it's super common. In other states, it's really not. When I was growing up in Arizona, we had a couple of private schools. There are a couple, but it's very, very few compared to places like when I moved to Ohio, and private school is extremely common there. And a lot of other places, on Ohio isn't East Coast, but it's close to the East Coast. And then lots of East Coast states definitely have a lot of private schools. So if you're in an area where you do have access to private schools, and that's something that you want to send your kid to, you could use up to $10,000 per year for that private school education or other educational needs before college. After college, this is where a lot of it is like, oh, well, we have extra 529 money left over. What do we do with it now? Well, if you were to have a balance, let's say, I don't know, $50,000 or $60,000 left when your child graduates college. One of the new things that has come about just in the last couple of years, and actually January of 2024 was the first year that this was able to be done, so it's still quite new, is that you can roll money out of the 529. The child can, the beneficiary can roll the money out of a 529 and into a Roth IRA. And they can do that with up to $35,000 of 529 money. So it is capped at $35,000, but that means that that beneficiary, that child, could potentially have a nice leg up in, a little bit of retirement savings at a very young age in life. So if they've been growing, and this is the other piece that's really cool. So the 529 has been growing for a while. The account has to have been open for 15 years. So that's an important part to be able to roll to a Roth. So the account has to be open for 15 years. And the contributions must be at least 5 years old that are being rolled to a Roth IRA. So that is meant to make it so that it's not like a backdoor Roth situation, really, for the 529 plan. Because you can't like contribute to a 529 and then immediately convert that over to a Roth. So that is what is being avoided here with this rule, that the contribution that is being rolled has to be at least 5 years old. And the account itself has to have been open for 15 years. So if your child is 10 years old right now and you want to open that 529, in order for this strategy to work, they would not be able to roll anything out until they're 25. Okay. And the contribution itself has to be at least 5 years old. So it does have stipulations, but when your child then gets out of school, say they get a job, and that's the hope, right? They graduate, they get a job. Now they have, the ability to make a Roth IRA contribution up to the limit of that year. So, if they can do a $7,000, if they have at least $7,000 of earned income, they can then move that money over and move $7,000 over into a Roth IRA, for example. So that is a really, really great new option that's available for up to $35,000. The other things that you can take into account if your child gets scholarships, right? And they don't need that full amount of a 529, you can take that money out of the 529. So let's say your child gets $25,000 in scholarship money and they don't need anything else, right? Let's say it's like a scenario where they're going to live at home. They're not going to, go live in the dorms, and they get a $25,000 scholarship and that covers everything. Well, you can now remove $25,000 out of their 529 account and do whatever with it. You will not pay any taxes or penalties on the amount on your contribution, your after-tax dollars that went in, and you will not pay a penalty on the growth in the account. But you will pay regular income taxes. So again, if there's $25,000 that you can take out of the 529, let's say 10,000 of it is your original contribution and 15,000 of that is gain from growth in the account. That means that you will have, $10,000 will be just a return of cost basis, basically, and $15,000 will be added to your taxable income for that year. And so you'll just pay regular income taxes, but you will not pay a 10% penalty on that money if, it's being taken out because of a scholarship. So those are some of the main things that people are thinking about when they're like, I don't know if I want to contribute to a 529 because I don't know exactly what the future holds. The last thing I'll say is that if you're thinking of doing this strategy and you're just really not sure, again, like, I don't know if it's worth it. If the math has worked out before when we do the math of the average compounding that happens within the account, the tax-free nature of that compounding, and then having to potentially deal with the 10% penalty on earnings on the growth if you take that money out and don't use it for education. The math has worked out in the past that if the account has been open for more than 10 years, typically the amount that it's grown tax deferred will actually surpass that 10% penalty on the growth. So if it's been more than 10 years that, if you start the account when they're a baby, and it's been in there for 18 or 20 or 25 years, the amount that it's grown tax deferred is actually more beneficial than if it had been in a taxable account that whole time. So even if you have to pay a 10% penalty, you're still ahead of the game versus if you had put that into just a regular investment account because of the tax deferred growth. So tax deferred growth is actually a really, really powerful tool and something that is worth investigating if your children are young and you have time to put money away. Or you'll be able to, if you'll be the account owner, then you'd be able to kind of direct where that goes anyway, right? So if it's you as the account owner, child as the beneficiary, and you keep control of the account until after college, and if there's still a balance, you get to direct where it goes. You can know that, oh, okay, if we leave this, we'll just be able to utilize it in the future in these other ways. So few things to think about with the 529 plans, with the fact that, college is happening, kids are going back to school. Yeah, I just thought this was a really important thing to talk about. There are some other options for college funding accounts that I don't typically recommend. One are Coverdell, savings to Coverdell ESA, IRAs. Those ones have such low limits that I have never really liked recommending or using them. It is an option, but that can be up to you if you want to ask your financial advisor about a Coverdell ESA account. And then there are some other options as well, like state specific or school specific prepaid tuition programs, but those I also have never been a big fan of those either because they pigeonhole. I think they pigeonhole a little bit too much to deciding what a child is going to do before you even know what's going to be appropriate for them when they get to college age. So another option that I've talked about with before on the podcast that I think is a really powerful, awesome tool is if you're able to fund a Roth IRA for your child. That's just such a phenomenal option for a lot of reasons. And if you fund both, if you have the ability, they do not cancel each other out, right? So if you have the ability to do both things, funding the Roth IRA for your child, if you're eligible, if they have earned income, if you're a business owner who is not an S corp but an LLC and a pass-through entity, that the Roth IRA can be a really, really powerful tool, and you can combine it with the 529. They do not cancel each other out. If you have to choose one or the other and you have the ability to do Roth, I think that's an awesome, awesome option. But yeah, you can do both. And then there's always the non-qualified account or the non-qualified APMA that we did talk about a little bit. which again isn't my favorite option in general, but is potentially something that can be helpful for other things, if you want to save for a car, if you want to save for, I don't know, a gap year, funding travel, funding, whatever it is that you might want to save for your kids in a non-qualified APMA account, they can have their purposes. So again, just something to talk to your advisor about. So I'm going to wrap it up there with the 529 talk. If you have any questions, or if you want to know anything else, if anything like sparked and you're like, hey, what about this aspect or what about that? Send me a question. Let me know. I always love to hear from people. I love to hear if this is helpful for you. It really, I'll say words of affirmation are one of my main love languages, words of affirmation and quality time. Oh, and balloons on Zoom apparently. So those are my main love languages, and I get to do both of those things on the podcast a lot. But yeah, hearing if it's been helpful for you, if you've shared it with anyone, what you're sharing and why it's been helpful, that has been super, super valuable for me to know as well, so that I can make sure that we're showing up here in a way that continues to be valuable, helpful, transformational for you and anyone you share with. So I would love it if this has been valuable for you, if you would like and subscribe and share and, put a review on either Apple or Spotify. That really helps the podcast push out to more people. So thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And to any parents out there sending your kids to college, for the first time, I am just holding you so dear, giving you a big hug. And I just want you to know that it's all going to be okay. Love it. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next time. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like and subscribe. And again, if anything resonated with you from this episode, I would love to hear from you. Email me at Hannah, HANNAH, @expansiveceo.com and tell me about it. And if you're ready for your greatest expansion, you can find ways to work with me at expansiveceo.com and at x2wealthplanning.com. That's X, the numeral 2, wealthplanning.com. So until next time, remember that there is enough. You are enough. And your birthright in this lifetime is to be expansive.